G'day, I'm Scott Poynton and welcome to another podcast. And today I'm talking to someone who I have known of almost all my life. Today I'm speaking to Hugh Locke. Hugh came into my life when I was a 15-year-old boy, and I listened to a wonderful old forester on the radio called Richard St Barbe Baker. I didn't know about Hugh then, but in learning about St Barbe Baker, I quickly knew that there was this young lad called Hugh Locke who was supporting St Barbe Baker as he travelled around the world to inspire people to protect forests and plant trees. And I was greatly, greatly envious of Hugh's role because having listened to St Barbe Baker on the radio, it inspired me to go down the path of being a forester. And some years ago, maybe 10 years ago, I contacted Hugh. Well, we got in contact, I don't know, I think someone was writing a book about Richard St Barbe Baker's life, and Hugh had seen of my work with the Forest Trust and suggested to the author that we speak, and that got us talking. And to my great pleasure, I still haven't met Hugh in person yet, but I know that's coming. But we've had some wonderful conversations in the last year or so, online on Zoom, and I thought to myself, why on earth haven't I interviewed Hugh Locke for my podcast? And so today, Hugh, with that by way of introduction, welcome to the Scott Poynton podcast.
Thank you. Although, as soon as you said we hadn't met in person, I thought we had met in person because it just feels like we have such a connection and so many things in common that, anyway, nice to be here.
Nice to have you, Hugh. And so let's go back. Well, what I'm interested in actually is you influenced my childhood when I listened to St Barbe Baker on his journey in Australia. And I'm just interested in, and I know you have a passion for trees, and I know you have a beautiful passion for gardens. You've seen some beautiful photos of your gardens. Tell us about your upbringing and how did you come to this work with Richard St Barbe Baker?
I grew up in a small farming community in central Canada, in Saskatchewan. And I just wanted to get out. As I left and waved goodbye, I said to myself, I'm never going to be involved in farming. And I went off to study architecture, first in Canada and then in England. But in the course of, first of all, having then in the midst of that become a Baha'i, I then had the chance to meet Richard St Barbe Baker. I didn't know who the man was, except that he was a Baha'i.
Now, Hugh, I have to interrupt you.
Okay.
Please help us understand what a Baha'i is.
Okay, Baha'i. Well, brace yourself. It's a religion.
Oh, no.
So we define Baha'i as a world religion.
Yes.
And the central premise is that the creator, the divine, however you want to identify that force behind the universe, sends periodic messengers to help guide the evolution of humanity. And the latest in that series of messengers is, for us, Baha'u'llah. And his revelation began in the middle of the 1800s. And that was the Baha'i faith. And the central tenet of the Baha'i faith is that in order for humanity to progress to the next stage of its collective evolution, we have to accept the oneness of humanity. It sounds like a bit of a meaningless slogan, but if you actually look at oneness as an organizing principle, it has applications from global political ramifications to national, to even looking at things like the holistic nature of the ecosystem. You need to treat everything as if it's got holistic interconnections. Because if you don't acknowledge that at the start, whether that's social, political, biological, however you want to look at it, you can't deal with the parts. Anyway, that's the underlying message of the Baha'i faith and what attracted me to embrace the Baha'i faith.
Yeah, it sounds a lot like Gaia. Obviously, that came a lot later, and I didn't know about the Baha'i faith until I discovered Richard St Barbe Baker, and I read about it, and it seems to me, I'm not a particularly religious person, but if I was, it feels to me like the Baha'i could be very interesting for me because this sense of oneness and caring for all things as being interconnected. And I have a great belief in that. Obviously from forest work, you learn about ecosystems and you see how people and other animals interact with other animals and plants, interact with each other.
Exactly.
It's quite extraordinary. So it was a great revelation to me to read about Baha'ism as well. And so, yeah, look, Hugh, I interrupted you there, but I think it's such but the Baha'i faith is such an interesting faith that I think it's really important for the listeners to be able to get that introduction to it.
So I met St. Barb when he was on a tour of Canada, and I was between universities and about to move to England to go to school there. And so we agreed to meet the following late summer. And so that was in 1978. And then I had some extra time because I was just before I was starting university there. And I traveled with St. Barb. And, he had all these amazing friends and contacts and introduced me to the world that he inhabited and created for himself. And it was fascinating, especially, a boy from the prairies in Canada, not much social exposure. And so there he was, taking me to the homes of these aristocrats, and it was fascinating. Then he went back to New Zealand because he and his wife lived there, but she didn't travel with him. And it's a longer story, but bottom line is I wrote him a letter. I said, "Dear St. Barb, I think you should let me help you organize and manage the remaining years of your life." I mean, what possessed me? But anyway, and then I said, I went further. I said, and I think you should have the following objectives that I will help you with. Number one, you need to reach a new and younger audience with your message. Number two, I know from having traveled with you last summer that you've got stuff everywhere. You need to pull together all your archival materials so that your legacy is brought together in one place in terms of research materials. And I don't remember the others, but those are the two things that we really concentrated on. And so I asked my parents to expand my allowance so I could get an apartment and big enough to have St. Barb come and stay with me for part of each year. The first summer that we were together, he sold off the last of the family silver.
Because he wasn't a rich man in any way. We should mention, he was this wonderful British forester who had set up an organisation in 1922 after World War I, after almost dying in World War I, wasn't he? He was injured and they thought him dead. And he came back to work in the British Colonial Forest Service, set up Men of the Trees in Kenya in 1922 to help inspire the people there to plant trees and to push back the Sahara. And so began his life of travelling the world. But he always, as I understood it, depended on wonderful support and donations from a number of people that he knew, and he lived a rather simple life. I visited him. I had the privilege of, I didn't visit him, but I went on a pilgrimage to the Mount Cook station.
Mount Cook, yes.
Because when he passed away, I was in contact with his wife and Catriona and Janine, and I can't remember Janine's sister, but they were looking after his stuff from there. And they said, Catriona has left you a Bible box, but you have to come and get it. So I did a pilgrimage to Mount Cook Station and was given this wonderful wooden Bible box that he used to keep all his letters in, apparently, while he was travelling. And so it was a marvellous experience for me to see the room where he would go and read his letters, and probably maybe even read that letter from you here all those years ago.
Yeah. Well, and I think of him as sort of he was a very eccentric Englishman who had this extraordinary vision. And I think of his work as sort of like a handbook for navigating the changes in the global environment and the role of trees. And, he was just this extraordinary champion. But through him, I was inspired to get involved in some way with trees and the environment. But also he introduced me to an amazing array of people. And that set off a course for me. So I had originally been intending to be an architect. And after 8 years of fairly expensive education, I said to my parents, I've decided not to be an architect.
I bet they were pleased.
Well, my father had an ironic sense of humor, said it was a rather expensive way to help you learn how to print well, because that's one of the legacies of architecture. But so St. Barb had introduced me to Prince Charles, for example, now King Charles. And there were two things about that, given that we're sort of, having a conversation that's unbounded here, let's just say.
Yes.
Because you did ask me, how did it get started? Well, growing up in Canada, the monarchy, is a big deal. It's the Queen at the time was on all of our money, and is technically the Crown in the UK is the head of state for Canada. So there's this, reverence, and there I was about to meet Prince Charles. So St. Barb asked me to accompany him to Buckingham Palace because Prince Charles was the patron of the organization that he established. Originally called the Men of the Trees, and then eventually, as people joined and were of both sexes, then it's now known as the International Tree Foundation. So we were going there, just the two of us, and we got to the palace. We're in the waiting room, and then the secretary, they call them an equerry, came to retrieve us and walked us through the inner courtyard of Buckingham Palace, which has got a gravel surface, and the tall walls echo as you're walking across this crunchy gravel. And I remember distinctly that sound. And we were going kitty corner across the courtyard. And we're about a third of the way through, and I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that my late grandfather was walking beside me in step.
Wow.
Now, I've never had this experience before. After I didn't ask for it, didn't want it, was a little freaked out when it happened. But my grandfather's gift to me was complete calm, because I had been an absolute nervous wreck, my knees shaking, my stomach in knots. And so this calm came over. He left. The equerry took us in, introduced us to the prince. He left, and for an hour and a half, Prince Charles, St. Barb, and myself. And I felt no more nerves than talking with you.
How wonderful.
And so for the rest of my career, I've worked with Mikhail Gorbachev, the Dalai Lama. I mean, and all of these people, I've never experienced a single moment of nervousness. And that was my grandfather's gift, which was facilitated by St. Barb,
It's amazing, Hugh. I must say, in our conversations so far over the last year or so, you've always struck me as a rather calm person.
Yes.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. Well, wow. So you've met all these people. Tell us a bit about some of that. How old are you now, Hugh?
71.
71. You don't look a day over
Yes.
60.
Oh, there you go.
Well, what a life you've had, and it's ongoing. And I know we'll come to this later. You're still doing lots of interesting things. But after St. Barb passed away, didn't he? I think in 82, wasn't it? Was that right?
Yes, 82.
82.
Yes.
And I know that your second objective for him came true as well, that you did set up a wonderful archive of all of his material in the University of Saskatchewan, which is interesting, hey, because that was his alma mater, wasn't it? That was his university.
Well, and there's a weird connection there. So St. Barb went out to Saskatchewan as a young man, as a Christian, missionary pioneer. And then, having broken land near Saskatoon in the middle of Saskatchewan, this was in trying to remember my dates here, because it would have been 1905, 6. And then subsequently, he was in the first class of the University of Saskatchewan.
Yes.
Now, the University of Saskatchewan, my great-great-uncle Frederick Engen gave much of the land and helped to finance the building of the university. I don't know if they ever met. I like to think that they were at a dinner at some point, but that was an interesting connection. So when St. Barb passed and I had all this stuff that we'd gathered, it was a big collection of books and letters and all sorts of material, films, recordings. And so I negotiated with the University of Saskatchewan to accept the archives and to maintain it in perpetuity at their cost. And,
Well done.
well, I was advised of this by the former president of the university, a wonderful man named John Spinks, who was a great friend of St. Barb's, and so I enlisted his help, and he wisely told me, make sure you know who's going to pay for this, maintaining this thing in ongoing years. And so with his help, we set it up. And so it's now, as I understand it, the second most researched archives at the university.
Is that right? That's extraordinary, isn't it?
I know.
That's amazing. Wow. All of that material gathered over such a long period of time.
Yes.
And now still available for people to go and research.
And they're digitalizing it gradually. So
you must be happy with that, Hugh.
Well, I'm happy that it's there. I would like to have it better utilized. And I really want to find a way to encourage people to look at it as a contemporary resource, because it's, many of the lessons that he learned and experienced have implications right now, particularly as regenerative agriculture and agroforestry becomes an increasingly important part of how we're going to address, climate change alongside challenges for food production and things like that.
Yeah. Well, let's go back. We don't have time to go through all of them, but you mentioned Mikhail Gorbachev and
the Dalai Lama.
The Dalai Lama. Please tell us about those experiences.
Well, with President Gorbachev, I was helping him as he had left office, and within less than a year, he launched a new international environmental organization called Green Cross International.
Yes, I remember.
In the United States, it was called Global Green USA because there was a trademark problem. They couldn't use the term Green Cross. So he traveled various places. I was sort of an aide-de-camp, and then became the first director of the U.S. chapter for about a year.
How did this happen, Hugh? Did someone just contact you out of the blue, or was it a job you applied for? Or?
Well, no. I was originally hired to be the chief of protocol for the founding conference of the organization in late 1991 in Kyoto, Japan. And I had advised the organizers, I mean, they were very well-intentioned. I don't mean to disparage them, but they're not particularly well-organized. So I explained that when a head of, because I was familiar with protocol because I did a lot of work for the UN. So I said, when a former head of state is coming to a country, you contact the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and you arrange to have a special delegation meet them at the airport so they don't go through customs and, so I wrote all this out.
And not just any former head of state.
Well, hello.
Yeah, Mikhail Gorbachev.
Mikhail Gorbachev. So he arrived, and he and Mrs. Gorbachev arrived, and they had not put this plan in action.
Oh, dear.
So if you can imagine, they had to stand in line with the tourists.
Oh, no.
So that did not go down well. Then they arrived at the hotel, and I had explained about how to create a security cordon. And I didn't think I was even going to meet him. So I was just there, setting up the protocols and saying, okay, this is what you need to do. And they did not do the security. So when they arrived at the hotel and they had to stand in line.
My goodness.
And they were mobbed, and Mrs. Gorbachev almost got knocked to the ground. So he went up to his room and he told the organizers he was leaving the next day. And they said, what can we do to convince you to stay? He said, I need this fixed. And they then called me and said, come up to room X. I went in, and Mr. Gorbachev, through a translator, said, how would you propose to fix this? And I said, well, sir, I would prepare a schedule for you each evening for the following day for your approval. I would set up the security cordon, and I would arrange every minute of your day as to the degree that you want, but all with your sign-off. He said, okay, I'm in. And so that started a relationship, and we had he was actually very funny behind the scenes, and very thoughtful, you know.
He set it up with the right reasons, I believe. He really,
Yes.
he did. And I don't know if is it still going today, Hugh?
Yes.
To a degree, yeah.
You know, it's like anything. These things evolve, and they don't always fully implement the initial vision because reality and whatever.
Life gets in the way.
Life gets in the way.
Yeah. And we shouldn't dwell on this too long, but the Dalai Lama, similar experience?
I helped to set up the first meeting that he had with Archbishop Tutu.
Oh.
And so that was hysterical. But then I was asked if I would potentially help the Dalai Lama to do a project on leadership training for people involved in planning projects that were going to have some impact on the world, and how to imbue spiritual principles into the leadership process. And so I went to meet with him at his home in Dharamsala, you know. That was lovely. At one point, there were a number of very wealthy people involved in this project, and I had to organize a reception for him in New York. And so these people were bringing like unnecessarily expensive gifts. It was a natural impulse. But when you're rich and you want to give a gift, sometimes it gets a little out of hand. So, you know, a lot of Steuben things. Anyway, so I organized this thing, introduced him to all these potential donors. And then at the end, I took him aside and I said, Your Holiness, I have a present for you. And I had bought a small, literally a marble that had the earth on it.
Ah.
And I said, I thought you might like to have the earth in your pocket. And that was my gift to him. It cost me about $1.50.
I bet he enjoyed it very much.
I like to think so.
Hugh, I think we could probably talk for the next 4 hours about these amazing experiences. I know that that's just a snapshot. You've been working in this area of peace building, ecology, now regenerative ecology, regenerative agriculture, regenerative forestry now for so many years. And I find it hugely inspiring. And I think it's so important that we hear stories like yours, because I also know you to be a humble person. And I've always found that you write you're not stories, but you write texts about the work you're doing, never about your own life. And what I know from a lot of young people who listen to my podcast or contact me is that they find these stories fascinating because they want to follow in a similar path. They want to have an impact on the world. And there's so many different ways for everyone to do it. There's many different ways to have an impact on the world as there are people in the world. And so this has been your way. And I often say to young people, you have to find your path.
Absolutely.
It's not that you do exactly what I did or what Hugh does or what someone else does. You've got to find your path. But I think it is inspiring because it gives a sense of hope that things can be done, that things can change. And I think that there's a great element of that in your story. And I would encourage you, if you haven't done it already, to write some of these things down, because I think it would be very inspiring for a new generation, Hugh, in the same way that St. Barb Baker, when I heard him on the radio after his visit to Australia, inspired me down my path in life. I think you could do the same with some of your stories.
Well, I am actually engaged in writing a new book.
I'm glad to hear that.
And in fact, I had lunch yesterday with my editor, who was visiting from California with his wife. And the book is called Soulful Sustainability. Because I wanted to take a look at what are the spiritual messages and experiences that can help to inform the scaling of regenerative agriculture, particularly in the global south with smallholder farmers, and drawing lessons from the Baha'i faith and not asking anybody to become a Baha'i. I don't care what you are or what you want to be. But I believe that there are aspects of the Baha'i experience that have a direct and useful application. So one of the early central figures of the Baha'i faith was named Abdu'l-Baha. And the Baha'i World Center, by accident of history, is in what's now Israel, but was then Palestinian area. I can't remember how you define it. So this was at the turn of the last century. And Abdu'l-Baha, living in Haifa, created a model farming community in an area outside of Haifa, closer to Syria. And this place was called Asai. And it turns out that and this has only recently been fully explored, that in creating this model farming community, Abdu'l-Baha essentially was the forerunner of regenerative agriculture, because he approached it, given the Baha'i faith's focus on holistic approach to any issue, starting off with humanity, but going down to farming. He approached it holistically in very much the same way that regenerative agriculture now is framed. But into that, in addition to pioneering new farming techniques, which essentially took a desert and restored it into a fully functioning agricultural space with a lot of orchards and fields in combination. So it was true agroforestry. And at the same time, looking at the spiritual dimension, and I mean spiritual not in a kind of sign up to a religion shtick, but rather, what's the role of consultation in ensuring community ownership over a process of development in a farming context? How do you resolve disputes in a way that doesn't cede all of your authority to somebody else, but gives you ownership over the process? How do you encourage the full participation of women, especially back in turn of the last century? Not an easy concept for the Middle East.
Yeah, no.
And so all of these things, so I'm trying to take a look at that and see what are the lessons that can be drawn out from that, applied to contemporary regenerative agriculture and agroforestry, and I don't know, see what's possible.
It seems to me that that sort of teaching could be put to so many uses today, Hugh, given what's happening in the world, so much or violence and polarization, and not a lot of sense of oneness. And
exactly,
way beyond regenerative agriculture, but very important there too. You've touched on something that's very dear to me, and I talk about spirituality a lot because I think our society, particularly our Western society, and I think it's coming also in Eastern society, which is perhaps a little bit more thought about individual connectedness and things like this. But I'm no philosopher. But I always see when I work with people that I talk about balance, and you have the physical, our doing things, you have the mental, the intellectual things, you have the emotional, how we feel about things, and we have the spiritual, which are our beliefs. And if you look at so much of Western culture and business practice, and just education, it's all about the mental and the physical, the doing and the intellectual. It starts off when we get to school, we're given a gold star for having the best picture, or gold medal for winning, being the fastest runner, and we reward the smartest person in the room. We reward the person who can do things in the best way. But if you're seen to be emotional, well, it's really perceived as quite a negative. Oh yes, they're a bit emotional, right? It's a put down, in fact, and to the point where discussions around spirituality are just even further into the background. Like, we just don't touch on it. It's like a taboo subject. It's for whatever reason, which I don't really understand. It's just so cast out. And I often talk about watering our garden, and so people water the physical and the mental because they get rewarded for that. That's where they get the best praise and the best jobs, the best promotions. They get more money if they can show themselves to be smart and able to do things. People talk about vulnerability, to show your emotions, and that's becoming a bit more common these days and even encouraged. But particularly for men, I think it's a very, very difficult thing to do. But spirituality, it's just not anywhere to be seen. And of course, I often say to people, spirituality is different from religion. It doesn't have to be. It can be one and the same. It can be one and the same, but it doesn't have to be. You can find a spiritual connection to yourself, to nature, or to others without following any particular religion. And I do feel, as I said earlier, the connection to Baha'ism was always interesting for me because it seemed to focus so strongly on that spiritual connectedness.
Mm-hmm.
So, do you think that role of spirituality, I mean, I keep saying we've got to find more balance. We've got to water all of our garden so that our emotions can come to the fore. So our spirituality, you ask someone what they believe and they, what are your values? Who are you as a person? And they usually look at you and say, what? What do you mean? They've never thought about it. And I know this is something you've thought about deeply. What are your thoughts on that, Hugh, this role of spirituality in a world gone a little bit crazy, or maybe even a lot crazy?
Well, one of the people who really inspired me in that regard was the late Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. And, I've had this weird life. It's like, again, the boy from the prairies. What am I doing here? But I ended up working very closely with Prince Philip for many years. And I first came to know him and work with him when he was one of the first people to ever identify the world's religious communities as an untapped resource in terms of environmental preservation. And he did this in his role as president of the World Wildlife Fund. But it was a deep personal conviction that drew him to that. He was a very, some people thought of him as very gruff and sometimes a little, short with people. And he could find people sometimes a little irritating when they were trying to be too obsequious in particular. But he was a deeply, deeply spiritual man who felt these issues very, very much to the core. And I really admired him for that because he continued this search always. So the idea of bringing the faith communities together, to me, was amazing. And it started off with an event in Assisi, Italy in, I think it was 1987. I'd have to check. So I had just started working for the Baha'i international community at a professional level, which I did for 6.5 years. And so I was representing the Baha'is at this inaugural gathering of the faith communities in Italy, the Christians, the Jews, Islam, Buddhism, etc. And then that evolved into a more intense process of collaboration for a couple of years. But the long and short of it was understanding that there's something there to be drawn on. And there are universal principles that you can track in all of these great faith traditions. Eventually, I felt that it really didn't work well as an interfaith initiative because the principles got too watered down in the process of trying to track them through individual faith traditions. And so that's why I've now reverted to looking at specifically what does Baha'i have to offer. They're still within that realm of universal spiritual principles. It's just that they have evolved and have a particular poignancy, I think, for this particular time. And especially, if I might divert for a minute to smallholders, because...
Yes, let's talk about smallholders here.
So essentially, St. Barb Baker worked with smallholder farmers because his initial work with founding the Men of the Trees in Kenya involved Kikuyu smallholder farmers. They didn't call them that in those days,
no.
But that was who they were. And so if you step back and you look now, okay, there are, by the best estimates, something like 500 million smallholder farms throughout the global south, the developing world, as they used to say. And the people who live and work on those farms add up to over 2.5 billion, which is a third of the entire human population. When industrial scale agriculture emerged as the dominant force in agriculture in the late 50s, early 60s, epitomized by the Green Revolution, the mantra was industrial large-scale agriculture will take over. Smallholder farmers will cease to exist as a part of the agricultural space, and they will all go and get jobs in factories building widgets, earning money to buy from large-scale agriculture.
Right.
Well, hello, didn't happen.
Didn't happen.
And there are still 500 million of them.
Yeah.
And so if we can find a way to engage with those farmers, and to me, regenerative agriculture represents that logical evolution of smallholders, because regenerative, by definition, is not new. It's taking the best of the traditions of agriculture in any given location and bringing them into a framework where they're interspersed with science so that you can pull together a holistic approach to agriculture specific to a location and a culture that nonetheless brings it into the 21st century while honoring the traditions that have brought it to that point. And then measuring the outcome so you have a way to know if it's working or not, a way to then be able to make adjustments. And so this, long tradition interspersed with science and contemporary application of agricultural understanding and measurement, then should be able to allow smallholders to become much more productive. In the work that I have done in Haiti, which is another story, but worked with smallholders there for about 14 years, and when introducing them to a holistic, organic process initially, and now regenerative, we found that without any outside elements, no fertilizer, no hybrid seeds, nothing, that just by applying these principles, they are able to increase production by an average of 40%. Because the traditions, for example, of compost have been lost.
Right.
So you need to bring that back in. The tradition of intercropping and understanding, how do trees relate to beans? If you put cassava as a strip on the outside of a cotton field, sounds weird, the bugs are going to stop in the cassava before they go to the cotton.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of basic things, which often has to involve experimentation, but you get to a point where you're in sync with both nature and the farm traditions and community. And so I think that represents a big part of the success story of the future in terms of dealing with climate change.
I think you're right, Hugh. And one of the things that we should mention is that these 2.5 billion smallholder farmers are actually amongst some of the most impoverished people in the world.
Yes. And yet they're hanging in there.
And they're hanging in there. And in many countries, tomorrow I'm on a plane to Ghana to work with some smallholder farmers with biochar, to put biochar. And I'm sure that was a tradition there before the Second World War that was lost when the fossil fertilizer industry turned up.
Exactly.
Put lots of money into promoting fossil fertilizer. We saw with the Green Revolution. But what we've also seen with the Green Revolution was that farming techniques spread into these places where perhaps the soils were very poor and weren't ready for intensive farming practices. The application of the fossil fuel NPK has just killed the soils, and with it the farmers' livelihoods. And so now they've got they can't afford the fertilizer, so their yields are going down, and when they do get fertilizer, they've got to put themselves in debt to traders, and when the crops fail, the traders take their crop and they use the money to pay back the fertilizer cost. What a disaster. On top of that, all of the the chemicals and herbicides and pesticides.
Yeah.
What an absolute disaster. And the soils are degrading the world over. And as we're seeing, insects are disappearing. All of these things are happening. And so what you're talking about is not just, and I think, I've heard people who promote industrial agriculture saying, oh, yes, you'll never feed the world with organic or regenerative. And I'm like, well, I'm not sure about that. To show me the research paper that says that. And as you just described, when you can put these techniques into place, you can get not just get huge yield increases, but you can start regenerating soils for long-term stability for farmers and their families. It's huge.
And especially when you look at it on a landscape scale, not just individual projects.
Right.
And now I will make an unapologetic plug. So I've, with colleagues, established this new nonprofit called Futura, FUTURRA.org. Anyway, one of our projects is to use AI to help to power the expansion of field-level research in the global south into sustainable and particularly regenerative agriculture by smallholders. Because, the whole mechanism for supporting research and development and infrastructure since the early 1960s has been focused on industrial scale agriculture and hardly anything for smallholders. So, even just being able to delve into at a local level, having a university work with smallholders to look at all the specifics of production of compost. How tall should the pile be? How big should the hole in the middle be to put the water in? What's the balance between manure and green matter? It sounds like you're talking about a horticultural local garden, but this is smallholder farming.
Yes, I mean, when we say smallholder farmers, it's farms less than 2 acres, I think, or 2 hectares. 2 hectares.
2 hectares or 5 acres.
That's the definition under FAO, and these are small farms, but they're feeding billions of people around the world.
Yes,
and not only that, they also export. I know in Ghana, the smallholder farmers of northern Ghana provide Ghana with 80% of their food. Isn't that extraordinary?
Yes.
And then it gets exported. Some of it gets exported. But I know from my work that for 4 months of the year, the farmers are living in absolute starvation. And they've sold all of their food. They've got a little bit of money in their pocket. The dry season comes. There's nothing to eat except cassava and yams. So the children get enough calories, but they don't get enough nutrients.
Yes.
So these children are all stunted. In the north, the 3 regions in the north, a paper was published, I think it was 2018 or 2019, up to 40% of the children in these 3 regions in northern Ghana, where so much food is produced, to the age of 0 to 5, are stunted in their physical and mental development. I mean, what a terrible thing. So I absolutely believe that regenerative agricultural practices, and I'm contributing to that through the production of biochar.
Yeah.
But, there's so much more beyond that as you say,
yes.
Hugh, just the composting and the use of green waste and tree planting, all of these things that can be done to support the farmers. And as you mentioned, Futura is, I'm amazed, you're coming to 71 and you've done so many interesting things in your life, and here you are involved in launching yet another venture. When do you think you'll take your boots off?
Well, I think, I'd like to stay harnessed until I die. I just can't see the point of retiring. There's no interest for me at all.
Yeah, so much more to do.
I also feel that, in a way, everything I've done up to this point has given me at least some tools to work with for this particular point in time, and making this contribution and bringing together finally the 2 big impulses in my life, my spiritual path and my path of service in terms of working with smallholder farmers and trees and agriculture. And so that's why I'm hopeful, despite the challenges that we face. Because if you look even at a technical point of view, you say, okay, we need to feed 2 billion more people by 2050. Where is the food going to come from? Well, that's not really the question. The question is, where is the food needed? So 100% of the increase in global population is going to take place in the global south.
Right.
And of that, 80% will take place in sub-Saharan Africa. So why not, in a location where smallholder farmers already provide at least a good portion of the food, increase their capacity by 50%? So you don't have to import the food needed to feed the increased global population, which will be in the same neighborhood.
Right. Why wouldn't you?
Hello.
Hello. It's a bit logical, isn't it? 2 and 2 together, and there you go.
But it needs some thought, and it needs some stepping away from conventional norms and saying, let's broaden our sphere of reference enough to be able to find answers that work.
In partnership with people.
In partnership with people.
As opposed to telling people what they should be doing.
Exactly.
Top down. Hugh, I feel we could talk for another 5 hours. I think we need to talk again. I'd love to welcome you back onto the podcast. I mean, I know you've got many more amazing stories from your life, but I think the work you're doing today is just so fascinating. I'd love to hear more about your work in Haiti. We're running out of time, unfortunately.
Yes.
But look, I just want to thank you for coming on to the podcast today, and it's my pleasure, as always, to talk to you. And I've learnt some of your stories today that I didn't know, and I have admired your work from afar in Haiti without ever going to visit it or learning about it. But I know that you're working constantly to make the world a better place, and I think that's deeply inspiring. And I hope not just young listeners, because, hey, you know, people are retiring from work and probably wondering what they're going to do. Well, you know, you could go out and get involved in some tree planting work or some regenerative work, agricultural work. We need all hands on deck to bring this vision to reality. So,
absolutely.
Hugh, thanks so much for talking to us today. And
well, thank you.
Just for the inspiration. Well, thank you, mate. And just for the inspiration. And as I say, so many years ago, I learnt about your work in support of St. Barb Baker, and here we are talking to each other. So I do believe the universe works, it's magic, and I look forward to working more with you. And I should say to our listeners that Hugh mentioned Futura, and I'm a new organisation that I've set up called Earth Trust. We're going to work with Hugh and the Futura team to help spread the message, to help people understand what's going on out into the field.
Yeah.
It's one thing to say you're doing something, but let's prove it and verify it with data. And through Futura, that data is being gathered. And with Earth Trust, we're looking to share that into the world so that when people say, oh, you can't do that, they say, well, yes, we can. And here's the data to prove it.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Hugh, thank you so much. And well, good luck with your ongoing adventures. And we look forward to hearing more about those in the future.
It's been a treat. Thank you so much, Scott.